Pode ser o Grupo Corpo ou a Companhia de Dança do Pantanal. Museu de Arte Moderna de São Paulo ou Arte em Cores. Filarmônica de Minas Gerais ou Programa Vale Música. Restauração do Museu Nacional ou da Cripta da Basílica de Nazaré. Onde tem cultura, a Vale está. Dos projetos que todo mundo já conhece, até aqueles projetos que todo mundo precisa conhecer. A cultura brasileira tem o nosso apoio. É valorizando essa cultura que crescemos e evoluímos juntos. Instituto Cultural Vale.
Mobilidade é vida. Somos a CCR. Estamos presentes em 13 estados brasileiros e em outros 3 países. Unidos por um único propósito: melhorar a vida das pessoas através da mobilidade. A inovação sustentável nos aponta a direção, as necessidades de nossos clientes, as oportunidades. Valorizamos os encontros, valorizamos a vida.
Ministério da Cultura e a Associação Casa Azul apresentam 21ª FLIP, Festa Literária Internacional de Paraty. A FLIP conta com benefício da Lei de Incentivo à Cultura, Lei Rouanet, PRONAC 231427, e possui acessibilidade para pessoas com deficiência física, visual e auditiva. Tem patrocínio Master, Instituto Cultural Vale. Patrocínio Ouro, Itaú, CCR e Caixa. Patrocínio Prata, O Globo, MAC Imóveis e Sebrae. Patrocínio Bronze, Globo Livros e Eletronuclear. Parceria institucional SESC, Prefeitura de Paraty, Embratur e Museu do Território. É uma concepção, Associação Casa Azul. Realização, Ministério da Cultura, Governo Federal, Brasil, União e Reconstrução. encontro da literatura com a cidade.
Hello, good morning. Good morning. My name is Fernanda Bastos, and together with Milena Brito, I'm one of the curator of this 2023 edition of our literary festival here in Paraty. And it's an honor, great joy that this year it pays tribute to Patricia Galvão, Pagou. And one of the main topics amongst the many topics in Pagou's literary works, and is a key topic, is to think about the organization of cities and how we circulate in cities and how suppressed groups try to circulate in cities. And this was the starting point of this session, much awaited meeting for all of us here. We look forward to this session with Adriana Ferreira Silva's mediation, a journalist, and that will have the participation of Joice Berth, Manuela, Davila, and of course, Professor Denise Carrascosa. So, Dri, come up here to moderate our session. Thank you. Let's take a seat, can we? Hello, good morning, all and everyone present here today. First of all, I would like to thank you for your presence, for being here this morning with us. I want to thank the NICE team at Flip, Fernanda and Milena, for the invitation, for their fantastic curatorship, and thank Denise Carrascosa, Joice Berth, and Manuela Davila. It is an honor to be here in this session with you all. The topic this morning, the name of our session is A Deadly Prison. There are many forms of incarceration that structure our society. Segregation, for instance, incarcerates people in peripheries. Poverty incarcerates people at the borders of marginalization. The white supremacy, patriarchalism, incarcerates women in socialized stereotypes. Languages are also forms of incarceration. Racism becomes or transforms more than 800,000 souls, black souls, that are incarcerated in Brazilian prisons. These are the topics that permeate Denise's, Joice's, and Manuela's works. And of course, Pagou, Patricia Galvão, the author we pay tribute to in this edition. Son of Oiá from Bahia, born in Salvador in a Saturday morning during Carnival, Denise works with women in prisons and incarceration. She is the co-author of several pieces of literature. She is also author of works that have to do with Feminisms in the Run, about black femicide, and Alone, techniques and policies in the margins, literature and imprisonment in Brazil after Carandiru, and Afro-ritual performances, how Eguns dance in policies in UFTA. She was born in the state of São Paulo in the north, and Joice Berth taught us that empowerment is not only a hashtag in social media. She is an anti-racial activist, architect, urbanist, feminist, political aide, curator, writer, essay writer. Other than empowerment, she also works and is a fantastic critic of how segregation in cities affects all of us. In her book, If Cities Were Ours, Se a Cidade Fosse Nossa, Racism, Geocentrism, and Diversity. And Manuela, she is a feminist, Marxist, journalist from Porto Alegre, the southern state in Brazil. She was there in one of the most violent and the saddest moments in Brazil. In politics, Manu has a lot of conquests. She was of course, she's a national congresswoman. She was the youngest and most voted national congresswoman. And she was the first councilwoman voted in her city. She has several books. Why Do We Fight? A book on love and liberty. And If It Were You, surviving hate, media, fake news, lies, hatred. And If the Target Were You, some of her books translated freely by the interpreter. I would like to start a conversation talking a little bit about literature and to expose your own feelings, your thoughts, impressions, human relationships, moral, and sex in other media and in other topics. In writing, women had to overcome so many obstacles, prejudice, deconstruct cliches established after years of male dominance in literature. And those that had the courage to do so, as Pagou, had their works of literature erased. She was trapped and imprisoned. Pagou, her public persona was restricted to the rebellious muse of inspiration, but she was a writer in her own right. So which are the barriers and prejudices that you overcame? How many ghosts did you have to fight against to become the writers that you became? Denise? Well, first of all, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And thank you to our heritage. This is a Friday. It's a very important day in African religion. So we ask permission to our elders, to our youngest traditions, and Egus that live here in Paraty, to all of the souls that have put all of the stones we're stepping on, not only the stones in our roads, but also the columns that build the colonial houses here. And I'm sitting here where others have been in my place, and collectively, socially, in this community, inheritance is the memory of our ancestors that have built our country. I am thankful of Milena and Fernanda. Thank you both. You are here. Great friends of mine and great intellectuals I admire and respect so much. So I thank the festival, Flip, and you for the invitation and the pleasure it is to be beside these two great women, to talk about you, learn with you, and talk closer to you in this very loving encounter. This question is a very intense question because it really touches us in places of memory for us Black women, which are difficult places when we are talking not inwardly but outwardly. And thank you, Adriana, for this question. I will try to connect this with the topic of our panel and my experience. I'm a literary critic. I'm a literary theoretician. I'm a faculty member. And 23 years ago, I decided to think about this topic and see how this could be related to people in prisons, in imprisonment. So when you talk about prisons as a metaphor, it is an institution that establishes our nationality project, allegedly or supposedly democratic. The prison is a project, institution that builds our democracy in inequality. It is a project that segregates populations by race, by gender, by social class, if you take a closer cross-cutting feminist look. So this prison could be a metaphor for writing experience, but it is also a very concrete structure that acts upon social imagery with political consent towards torture that does not end in the dictatorship but that stays and lingers on, not as a residue of the dictatorship, but as a nation project that punishes, segregates, and punishes racialized black bodies, the bodies of black women, which are the absolute majority in prisons, and more than 800,000, Adriana said, souls incarcerated right now. So since we have this imagery that is built to the service of an unequal project, there are other adjectives that are associated in this national project. So when we think about Maria Firmina dos Reis, last year's author, which Flip paid homage to, when we think about the writing, she was signing her books as an author from Maranhão, but she was not published. She was not authorized to publish, and only 100 years later, she is published as an anti-slavery author. 100 years later. So, who is part of literature as a subject matter? Who will be described in national historiography as an author and as a woman author is decided by other people. So, and the publishing market has its own ways in developing the literary festivals of fairs. There is a literary production system, and we're here in one of these devices. This is an international fair with public and private and public financing that finances sessions and authors. And recently, we could have had a session in which feminist black women can express their ideas, give autographs, have publishing houses that publish them. This happens now. It's just very new. 10 years ago, this was not the case in Brazil. So my writing, my literature is a consequence of my experience. I work with prisons because of my family. My family is a black family. We're all jurists. We are all graduated from the federal universities in Bahia, but we are a family that was really socially vulnerable in my country, and I was born during Carnival, and we are a family of jurists, and my father in the 80s worked on a voluntary basis in prisons in our state in Bahia. So that's how I started working with writing, trying to understand through my family that I could have access to a library, that I could read other authors, and that I could even write my own work. Hello, good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here this morning. Thank you, Flip, and you, Fernanda, Milena. Thank you so much. I mean, it's an honor to be here in this session moderated by Adriana. Adriana studied so much about us that when I talked with her back here and backstage, and when I said that expert and this expert, so she knows more about my book than myself. Denise, Joice, it's such an honor to be here with you, a feminine audience, paying homage to Pagu, such a revolutionary woman that she combined her will to transform the world with her passion for art, for literature, and for mankind, womankind as a whole. She never separated the idea of the fact that humankind could live better. And this has to do with the curatorship that you have organized to pay tribute to Pagu, that is closely related to the fact that this is a space in which we can think and talk about our country, trying to think about options for women to live better lives. I decided I would be a writer when I was a little girl. I decided I would be a journalist. I was a little girl. I was a very restless child. I was a white girl in Rio Grande do Sul, and I wanted to change the world. And I said, I'll tell people about the world, because nobody knows what the world is. Because if people knew about the problems, I was 8, 9. Of course, they will try to get involved. Nobody will just do nothing about the reality of inequality and horror that I saw when I was a little girl. And I realized that I wouldn't change the world as a journalist. As a public woman, that decided to write and that had other spaces of influence, we all share the idea, the understanding that our intellectual capacity is always questioned, always questioned. My greatest conquest, considering what you mentioned, Adri, in your question, in the sense, in the most literary sense, it is to trust in myself and think that I had the capacity that I think I have, that I know I have, that I struggled and studied so much to conquer. Because all of the times that I was present in a public space, the bar were other issues other than my own capacity. When I decided to become a writer, and I was a public person first, I had to overcome a second barrier, which was the option to write about maternity in a moment in which Brazil was going through a very violent and hatred period. Everybody said that I had to write about violence in 2018. And I thought this was unfair for Brazil and our people to transform such deep memories, as is the case with writing, only one dimension of what I had gone through, because I'd lived in two situations that have to do with our peoples, with our capacities, and the struggle of our women. On the one hand, I lived hatred and terror, and then on the other hand, I lived the response of a people that tried, together with me and my daughter, a little daughter, tried to organize the response in expressions of love and compassion. So I had to overcome my own resistance to tell a beautiful story in the face of horror. And this is very complex and contradictory, to think about the strength of beauty, the transforming strength of beauty in the face of horror. So I think white women face totally different situations compared to black women. We come from a place in which we have a number of privileges that other women, black women, do not have. And as a principle, and assuming that there is no space that is a space in which white women have the space of recognition and less vulnerability, we women collectively, we white and black women, are always subject to the public scrutiny of non-capacity. And this is reflected in literature as the reflection of this thought. This was my ghost. And when you said ghosts, I thought that I hadn't fought my own ghosts. And the question is, which are the ghosts that you fought against? Well, I'm still fighting against my own ghosts. I mean, ghosts are rushing here in my ear, reminding me that I can't face all of my ghosts in this lifetime. I mean, they're not really ghosts that we have faced in the past. These are ghosts that we face every single day. We decide to keep on writing, keep on reading, keep on telling stories, networking and connecting women that do this.
Muito bom dia.
Good morning, one and all. I thank you so much. I'm so moved just for being here. Milena, Fernanda, wonderful women, wonderful creatorship. Our ancestors, I'm sure, are celebrating this coming together. I want to thank not only my colleagues here, but each one of those that are here watching us today. So we're talking about mortal prisons or deadly prisons. By the influence of Virginia Bicudo, of Neuza Santos, I decided to study psychoanalysis, and I've been studying more and more. I'm a training psychoanalyst. I've been studying for 4 years. You do these different education pieces. So and I've been talking to many people in the sense that we need, at this moment in history where we have such heavy attacks, they really want to eliminate or mold what we think and to make us more fragile. So we have to present ourselves as the enemy, him or herself. I am my own enemy. So through psychoanalysis, I was discovering this because society in general is structured to undermine the strength of social minorities, women, black women, LGBT, natives, the low income. Everything is created to be this way. So what are they able to build subjectively and psychologically? They can build in us an enemy within that is the whole time there saying, you are incapable. My way of writing starts way back when I was 8 years old. I got this little notebook, and I had a difficulty. I was not very social, especially when I left my family. I felt very vulnerable outside of my home. And this was already one of the effects of racism. I was unable to talk a lot. And even in my house with my family, I felt that not everything was allowed to me in terms of things I could say. And this aunt of mine, who has already deceased, and I hope she's in a nice place in Orun, she gave me this little notebook. She would give gifts, and at age, she gave me a little notebook, with like a diary, a journal actually, with a little padlock. So then I started to write, and I would feel more powerful writing and locking it because I didn't want anyone to know what I was writing. And so I started writing in this journal. And then I also became known through my writing. I remember in 2015, 16, I was invited to participate in feminist press collective. And everything I wrote I kept. I didn't feel, self-assured enough to show it. So all my colleagues from the feminist press read a text I wrote about maternity and feminism and said, no, you have to publish it. They really wanted me, let's publish it. And then it went viral. People read it. And I thank all the women for this network because the women strengthened me. They helped me to do this. To be a woman is to be in the deadly prison within this perspective of womanness that society built. It's always, we're always seen like lesser people. But the same prison was a form of liberation because these women allowed me to write. They identified themselves with what I was writing, and they would read and say, no, people have to read what you're writing and this and that. So from that moment on, I was less afraid and I was less unsure of what I was doing to be able to talk about what I was writing. And I think still to this day, I think that I'm better off writing than speaking. People just look at my text on the internet and they said, wow, it was like a slap in my face. It's like a slap to the face. It's like right there up front. And the intention is really to do that, to allow people to see other sides. Where you are unable to have the centrality, a visibility scheme that society will value. And again, I stress this, we have to look within and we have to find all the different little prisons that society inducted us and society made us build. If you feel you're incapable, do it. If you really find that you're not capable, then you have other options. Go do other things that you can do because we're not a single being. We have different possibilities, different abilities. So we need to look into that. So this prison that I am inserted in as a black woman is not a prison that I created. It is something that society created. So if you decide to live or not in this prison, that's my decision. And through writing, through speaking, I want you all to follow this path, the path of understanding that the prison that we were put in is not the prison where we're going to stay in. We can and should leave this prison. And this whole theoretical framework that feminists will bring, that other academics and understandings, expressions and understandings will different opinions by art, movies. For instance, Pagu, I saw this film on Pagu and I fell in love with Pagu. And I said, wow, what a woman, force of nature. So we have to leave behind this prison that we were put in. So we have to look within and we have to map. What do I have inside of me? What can I overcome? So the same prison that we find ourselves in can become a key to open and to live and live fully. So now, I guess we are living a very special moment now. We have 2 women curators at Flip. We have lesbians, trans in our program. Most women, lots of black women. We have Fuvest for the first time in its history. We'll have a list of books signed only by women, authored just by women. And entries, they would include Machado de Assis again. And what interesting thing is are the themes in terms of books. It is the world seen by women. Annie Ernaux came last year, and she writes so powerful but simple books talking about important and common topics. I remember when I interviewed Annie Ernaux, she said she was criticized when she wrote a book about supermarket, and she said it was a man writing about supermarkets. It would have been something spectacular, fabulous, but not for a woman. So I'd like to hear from you, based on your work, how can we talk about these different topics? Joyce, for instance, when she talks about the city under the perspective of a woman, is completely new as a perspective, of a new way of seeing it, as like Manuela writing about maternity, or like Denise writing about the experience of people that are in prison. So now let's start with Joyce. Yes, I guess where you are at will change the way you see society, your point of view. So those who have, I guess no one is fully free in society, but to be a man, white man, to have a higher economic stance will make you closer to a full freedom and almost unrestricted. So you will see the world without any kind of difficulties. But when you are poor, black, trans women from the periphery, from the projects, you are in the scheme that is in of itself a prison. So you will see the world through these bars, things that you can or cannot see or do, and you change completely your way of seeing things. When an example from architecture, I talk about the phallus architecture, the phallic symbols. So it's phallocentric architecture. It's a new standard of machism, of chauvinism, and something that we need to think about. And the phallic center is not only restricted to masculinity. We end up sort of absorbing this. So when we talk about the phallocentric architecture, we see, for instance, Paulista Avenue, a commercial center full of buildings in downtown São Paulo with skyscrapers, banks, and it represents the economic power. All these buildings are highly masculine, and so they're giving us a certain information saying money matters and the social pyramid will be fed for centuries on end. And then in the middle of Paulista, you have Masp by Lina Bobardi. This is not a woman that was actually a feminist, an activist in feminism, but she had the idea of what it meant to be a woman in a society that was based on chauvinism. So you see, Masp, you have all this opening, these empty spaces. Everybody who is there feels that that's a breath of fresh air. And so it is there. So you have Masp, which is great open spaces. So these two architectonic features will give us the right dimension of the whole idea of where you are at, your place, your voice. You have to go through this. This is where you're at, what you occupy. It is the way, your point of view from where you are from a social standpoint. So Lina Bobardi develops this project that will open itself to society, to the city, and it sort of welcomes, it's an expansion. And all the other projections have a phallic-centric symbology with a more vertical, giving us the dimension of the pyramid. Because, of course, the top execs will be on the highest floor, and then you go down to middle management and further down. So the lesser your service, the lower you are. So those who are the cleaning people will be in these little hidden little back rooms. Not only the whole idea of what we call in Brazil the social elevators and the sort of backdoor elevators or service elevators. So where you are in society will bring you this dimension. This is why it's so important to listen to all the different perspectives. Diversity is our wealth, is our treasure. Diversity is our treasure, especially in Brazil, a country that has this whole idea of welcoming the whole, but it doesn't welcome wholly. It is a fragmented welcoming. So it's important to make this switch of starting to understand that diversity is what supports us. It is what might allow us to switch our values, and we really have to place all our bets there. We have to understand from where you are at, you have a certain vision of society, but it is your own vision. It might represent the group you represent or you're part of, but it is not the totality. And this is something that we see in what we write, in what we speak, in our lectures, to help you understand this is a black woman speaking. When I hear another black woman or I read a black woman, I automatically identify myself. I say I was influenced by Virginia Bicudo to start the psychoanalysis, because when I read her writings as a psychoanalyst, even though she was talking about Lacan, who was a white man, I identified myself. That was the voice of a black woman, what she was assimilating and understanding as a black woman. So this is essential. This will completely change the vision of those who will actually understand that information. And it helps us also to have this self-knowledge exercise based on what we produce.
Eu estava pensando que
I was considering that I've sort of inverted my path. My decision of starting to write and do this has to do with what I wanted to present to literature after what we lived collectively in our country. People would ask me what I was going to do after a process such as the one we lived in 2018, if I was going to go back to college, if I was going to go back to journalism. And I decided myself, I came from the internet, I was elected with the support of social media and stuff. I decided that I was going to tell the story based on the books, because this does have a relevance in terms of allowing us to interpret Brazil in a different way, to reach different places, different from what we were before. So to present literature in a relevant manner, people that are considered relevant, that might express their opinion, to put the books in that same place. This was a decision that I took very consciously. And when I say I took the inverted path, is I tried to use that visibility I had built in other spaces to allow people to pay more attention to certain topics that I considered as relevant. Maternity allowed me to understand that a central part of the gender oppression, even as a feminist woman, I had not understood, because I had not lived it in all its intensity. I knew it theoretically. I didn't know it from the actual white woman's perception. As I say, if there is a pyramid, I'm sitting right at the top because I'm a white woman, and I had a partner who shared all the responsibilities. I had economic conditions to have an educational support to my children, to my daughter. 50% of the women's of mothers are unable to work in Brazil because they don't have anywhere to leave their kids. So I tried to politicize my personal experience in the sense that I wanted it no longer to be something individual, personal. I wanted to show that this was a collective experience. All women, mothers that had difficulties much larger than my own had to be confronted with. And then I tried to produce a diagnosis that I was doing, and I still unfortunately do, because my diagnosis, the reality hasn't changed and the diagnosis continues the same. We advanced a lot, just like this flip. This flip is a result of a great advance of secular struggles, but let's say listenings that have been opened only recently to these struggles. Then they were only now able to to harvest the fruits of the seeds we planted way back then. But still, society does not advance, especially when we talk about literacy, awareness, black, white women, and the people how people think about us, how we want them to refer to us in history. So I decided to do this backwards exercise. Many of my feminist friends, I asked them to send me by WhatsApp everything they heard of what they were or they were not. Very simple sentences of the man that will come for a snack, the guy who works in the bus driver, that women, for instance, that we heard that, oh, because we hate you because you hate men. Things that probably Pagu heard throughout her life a lot more than us. And from that point on, I decided to answer it in a certain way. And I thought, I'm going to express this as if I were talking to my grandfather, to have my grandfather understanding, not someone that is like woke. So I wanted my grandfather to understand. I wanted my literature to have some impact. I didn't write it. I didn't want to write to our own public. I wanted to write to those who could be reached, to people that are outside this world. So it is a literacy for those that have not access to this kind of literacy. So when we're talking about structural, when we talk about a structure, we are not holding people accountable individually. And people will have to, struggle individually, even if we're in this immense structure, even all of us, where we reproduce chauvinism or misogyny, we always have to find an individual way out. So I decided to start producing books that will try to explain basic concepts that we believed that everyone knew and that people were embarrassed of asking about. And other people didn't have all the spaces to achieve this in a very simple manner. And when I ended this, Adriana, it was really funny because the first person who talked about the book said, "Isn't it a bit childish?" And I said, and I remembered this comedy saying, "Oh, it hurts to be an intellectual." Remember? To be an intellectual hurts. And he said, what world is this we are living in which when we try to write, thinking about the public that do not know, to give them an entrance that is fantastic after we open. It's fantastic to be there. And then we say, look, we have Joice you can read. There's Denise who will talk about this. Find a path. So what kind of world is this where we will believe that this kind of opening, this window, this production, unnecessary or invalid? So my effort was to try to find in these topics, which were my bigger ghosts that were knocking at my door, people were screaming, "Oh, you want to do away with men." So I wanted to transform this violence, this loose words, into something that would be a content and do it in the form of books, because this is something we have to reflect also. In this world where we live in this ephemeral things, all of us here, we're doing this effort not to look into our cell phones because we always have to be connected, and everything very fast. So what kind of message do we want to say when we say that a book is the path? If we had the complexity, the subjectivity, the ability of having what books bring to us, would we believe in things as fake as we find on the internet? Isn't this the parameter that will allow us to have people accepting diversity, people who live with different characters and who are able to measure their conflicts based on these characters? Aren't these people more tolerant to diversity, to society? And maybe when you humanize Pagu, understanding Pagu beyond her own idea. They used to call me Pagu in the council I was a bit of a Pagu because I was a rebel. So, and then municipal council. So when we think about the books and what books bring to us, don't we have other keys, other ways of dealing with the world? So this is how I wanted to bring these topics to this space.
Denise.
Fantastic. When we think about literary writing, we can associate this to a country's literature in the construction process of a country. Literary critics have done this. And of course, the construction of the nation state of any modern society based on modernity is done based upon writing. Writing that is not necessarily in books, but it could be the rhetoric or a discourse. She was talking about the architecture of Paulista Avenue in downtown Sao Paulo. So this discourse that identifies a society is shared by everyone in media, with journalism, coverage, a rollout, and drama in serious TV. This is the social imagery that expresses itself through values that accept social behavior and create the fabric of society. So this is what literature is. I want to think amongst us. Let's try to think about literature, as Diane Grant said yesterday, a transparent discourse. Literature in our country, and many literary critiques have mentioned that this also can be sexist or racist if we think about the construction of the imagery in focusing in the body of black women in Georges Amado's literature, focusing on favors done by black women. So that's why Adriana's question is essential, and our answer is essential in order to understand that there are blind spots, fragile spots, disruption points that are possible, whereby the social imagery that agrees upon the violence that's exerted on our bodies can be dismantled. The literature towards freedom, utopias, literature towards democracy, that is where literature is created. It is in this place of perspective that nobody paid attention to. It is in this anonymous intersection. Why am I talking about this? When I studied literature that was produced in Brazil after 1992, after Carandiru's massacre, of course, the literary world was flooded with testimonials of people in incarceration. We have the novel about Drauzio Varela. We have many novels, Carandiru, a literary series, a TV series. And at the end of the 90s and at the beginning of the year 2000, we were 10 years old after the massacre of Carandiru prison. Narratives and stories written by the incarcerated men. Essential narratives, important narratives, moving narratives. But there was no space in Brazilian literature, neither in drama or theater. We all went to see plays that talked about the torture process. There was no space for tortured women's bodies. But the story of slavery in Brazil and globally shows us that the body of black women was the body of service, the raped body, the body of the mule that transports drug, the body that is... And Angela Davis and Marxism. Angela Davis in 1978 says, rape, racism, and capitalism. When Angela Davis offers her feminist perspective to Marxism. So a woman's body can be raped and exchanged, bartered for drugs, for money, for pleasure. So the body of black women incarcerated under permanent torture. And I quote Carla Cottirini, that will be here today. I recommend you to participate in her book that is launched here in Brazil. I was the pleasure to be her co-mentor in her dissertation in Bahia that talks about racism and sexism in prisons. And I'm calling the attention because it is the black women femicide, because we we have to face this reality. We are progressive women, and we are now in a left-wing government, and we have to talk about black femicide. And it is very difficult. It's very difficult to deal with this, to verbalize this, put this in so many words. Being progressive in Bahia, we have a left-wing government. Women suffer torture, institutional torture, rape, institutional rape through magazines that diminish them. I visit them in prisons once a week for the last 13 years. I go into the prisons, I teach them literature, and that is why I go back to what Adriana mentioned. These women, when they read Conceição Evaristo Joice, Ariana Alves Cruz, Sigmira Itamar Vieira Jr., of course, Ana Maria Gonçalves, of course, these women, imprisoned women, they produce literature themselves. We have a library in the prison in the state of Bahia to teach them literature and helping them read and to produce what? This freedom process, freedom of their subjectivity. You read a book within your prison and you have the right to write down a summary. If you write down a summary, you will shorten your stay 4 days. I coordinated this project. So beyond this construction process of your own freedom, which is an abolitionist, feminist process, they are writing about themselves. They are finding this place within themselves that they fight against the state. Because the enemy is not the man that abuses them and that is the person that is the criminal in domestic violence. The state is also the enemy. So we're talking about black femicide because most women, 92% incarcerated black women in Bahia. That is the last service of our state. And in Brazil, 68% of incarcerated women are black. So let's take a closer look to Juliana Borges, Carla Cotireni's work here in Brazil to understand and take a look at this women's writing product. This was an utopia I had 20 years ago to give these women the possibility to write and publish. So Feminisms in the Run is a collection with the writing of these women in their literary process so that they can express their perspectives, which is one of the blind spots, one of the most strategic blind spots in the construction of this country is the torture process in the body of black women. They resist through many ways, but mainly with writing. And now somebody's listening. Denise, now I will give you a chance to talk about this job and what you're doing with women that are incarcerated. And during this edition in Flip, a book is launched with narrations written by Pagu while she was in prison herself. We have very powerful books by black women that were written during incarceration. Angela Davis, Preta Ferreira. You wrote the preface of Abdias Nascimento, a powerful book. So tell us about the experience that you lived specifically for them, because reading Feminisms in the Run, I was so much moved by the poems in this collection. There are black women that talk about a topic that is forbidden, which is maternity. It's forbidden for these women. So these women make their love, they express love, they declare their loves, and I mean how these women experience writing. Thank you for your question, Adriana. Nobody asked me this question ever. I'm touched by your question. And what a difference a good mediation does. I've been elsewhere, and it's really, I mean, the mediator, I mean, congratulations. Congratulations for you. So when I wrote the preface, I mean, Abdias Nascimento's book, and it really touches me because we took decades without knowing that Abdias was imprisoned at Carandiru prison. And there is a manuscript that was published, and I was the honor to write the preface of this publication. But I want to talk about something that I wrote in Angela Davis' last book with Erica Minders and Beth Witches, which is a book that was launched in Salvador, inside the prison in Bahia. I invited Angela Davis, and she was there, and we launched her book of these abolitionist feminists with the book of these imprisoned women. So that's where I'm answering your question from. So in this preface that Angela invited me to write, I use a concept. Literary seismography. What is literary seismography? The question that was made to Dion Grant yesterday was essential. Poetic writing is the possibility of having an earthquake, creates an earthquake. Of course, writing not only represents life as it is, it also is seismic. It can produce an earthquake. You can see the world through the blind spots of eruptions, dictatorships. If you go there where nobody's paying attention to, you need to create a turmoil. Milena, she agrees with me, she's nodding. And we as literature professors, we have changed. Everything has changed. So that's why we talk about seismography. It is the writing of the seismic shocks of earthquakes. It does not reproduce, but produces. John yesterday said, maybe I might not make a living with my writing, but I produce lives. That's what she said yesterday, Dion, and that's my desire, to create lives. So let me answer your question. These women, and I do this for 13 years, before we had a former slaves community black publishing house that would publish women that are considered criminals by society because they're in prison, publish incarcerated, prosecuted, and allegedly criminal women. So we have two publishing houses in my state. We started with poetry, now we're working with drama, and now we are publishing a collection of short stories that will be published next year. So the writing process, Shirley Paixão, Conceição Evaristo, where we see abuse. You probably read this short story. A black girl is raped. We're working in a room with poor black vulnerable women that have suffered torture, that have been victims of violence. So the black feminist method has to be ethically considered and thought. So we're working with what? With silence, denial. There is a psychological process, stages, so this writing can change and model the ability to speak. But it is the possibility, the power to understand what's going on. That body, that person, within that society, under those circumstances, is becoming aware. And it is painful. And being painful, it can only be supported by the community, by the ethical community that supports you. We cry so much. When we're writing, we cry so much. But this should end, and they should understand that it's not only about pain. Pain is one of the stages of this process. So on July 11th, when we were in the prison to launch the book Ferminas in the Run, this publishing house took the challenge, and we said, okay, let's produce a launching session with a script, with performances, with lesbian wedding, everything, with a transgender person that is incarcerated there and playing the role of a woman incarcerator with different roles: gender, sexuality, religiousness, territory. Candomblé, Ubanda religions are forbidden. It's the infringement of the right to religious tolerance. So what we did was to try to work with Angela. Angela, she didn't autograph her books. Angela autographed books for them, for these women. They autographed their books for Angela, and Angela autographed her book for the incarcerated women that were also launching their book. So yes, we can talk about that. Oh my God, time is running by. My God. There is a piece of paper that you have in your seats. If you want to ask questions, write them down. Okay, Manu, you talked a little bit about your book in which you talk about words. Roland Barthes says the following: language is neither reactionary nor progressive. It's fascist, because fascism is not prevented from saying, is obliged to say. And I think that your book talks about things that are trivial or daily, and I don't think so, because we can say, quote unquote, that they talk about daily things, but I learned so much. I learned about ableism, about resilience, about fake news, but we also talk about sororities, a concept coined by Pina Piedade. So you adopted or coined new terms to attack the dominance systems. You made me cry, Denise. Denise's talk was so moving. Angela, the icon in the Americas, the woman that makes us rethink, us Marxists, think about our statements. She comes, she reorganizes, and I thought about Angela receiving the autograph book of women that are bodies that will be exterminated, because prisons in Brazil are places where you put what you want to forget. And if you had the chance, you just erase them. You would just erase them. This is what we do here. And I was so much moved with your experience, Denise. I was very moved to tears. Well, what we lived and we live is a transition between the past and a present that has traits of the past, has characteristics, verbal violence. The United Nations and some of us call hate speech. Hate speech does not hit everyone in the same way. I realized that this was the fact as a victim, and I looked around to see who was a victim with me and who ignored the strength of the violence of words. Who can ignore violence of hate speech? Well, what Joyce mentioned, maybe if we were fellows, brothers, sisters in my struggle, we wanted to fight against climate change, the violence I suffered, my friends and my peers, those that were close to me. And that's why I think about the concept of having a club of suffering, the pain sorority. And there was a group of non-solidary white men that had no clue about what I was going through. And I would go into the profile of these persons late at night, and they were ordinary people living normal lives. Once I said, does your fiancé know that you're doing this? This was a person that was studying pedagogy, and he posted such pretty lives. And I said, my God, what is the space that verbal violence takes in the life of this person? How can this not violate or make somebody suffer? And this was terrible for me because I lived it in my skin personally. But I couldn't overcome the fact or think about these people as totally evil persons. I always thought about, and my daughter always says, stop saying that you feel sorry for this person. Just hate them. No, I just wanted to understand why they did that, or why, or how this was triggered, and which was the masculine subjectivity that I had hurt, and that as a consequence, made this person do this. But I said, I will breastfeed my daughter in a public space because I want to, as a public woman. I mean, and white women can say, yes, I can have a nanny. I can have a nanny. And it is a symbolism, a white woman that has a black nanny, and this black woman as a nanny, and the white woman saying that she had gone through the ice, the glass ceiling, and she had freed herself, as some feminists ignore these brutal differences between her and the black nanny. And Adri, for me, language was everything I had in this period. The misunderstanding and cancellations that we produce. I have some people that were canceled in front of me here. And what we also produce as cancellations, because we do not tolerate people that are in a different place. And I went back introspectively, thinking about the feminist women that I was not in the past. I was a left-wing activist, but I didn't see myself as a feminist because I thought that feminism was a thing of the past. We had to talk about economics because men talked about economics. I wanted to be like men. I didn't want to be like women. I took pride in the fact that I didn't have women girlfriends because I was part of the brotherhood. I was proud about that. And what we theoretically talk about conscientiousness or awareness, I was part of the expression of the language of the concepts, becoming part of these concepts, making them my own. But why couldn't I entitle people along the way in this process? And in the search of this process to find words, we become Saramago's quote that says, we are the words that we use. And this last period we experienced in Brazil was the maximum expression of what can be built by words. We had a horror government that was constructed through verbal violence. I wasn't killed, my daughter wasn't killed, but I lived the threats for 8 years. And the only possibility is to be to express my solidarity towards other women in my same situation. As Denise said, we have parliamentarian congresswomen that need police escorts. They need to be protected. Women, some lesbian, some bisexual, some black women, in 1 week, eight were threatened by death or rape. We have a agency that monitors the executive and the legislative. While these congresswomen were under threat, the silence, the most obvious evidence that the life of women is not even worth an Instagram post, was rampant. And throughout this political process, the only body that suffered during this process was a black woman. Minister Dino, the President Lula, the average of women that could have expressed solidarity. I mean, on internet, you talk about everything. A football game, everybody talks about the football game. You just, a selfie, you're there, you're posting, and we'll post a selfie amongst ourselves. The political agenda, the public agenda, the literary agenda takes place in social media. I can then assume that what we see in social media is the expression of what really exists in the public agenda. Only 12% of women expressed their solidarity for these women. 14% total of analyzed parliamentarians expressed their solidarity. If words echo, if words can use an armored car because you're afraid and you need police escort, words are missing. Words are lacking. In this exclusive discourse, and that's the reason why young Manuela, we thought, oh my God, these feminists, they're such a bore because they go on and on and on about this. And then after what I went through, I mean, I mean, years down the line, we're living exactly the same situations. I look back on them and I said, of course they have to talk about this because nobody does. Nobody does. So, this is the true paragame of what is said, what is silenced, and that is why what is historically silent is essential and has to be said here at this festival, at Flip. And what Paulo Freire said, it is the pedagogy, the pedagogy or the teaching patience, that is to talk about what we want to talk about, not being silenced, and to have the ability to see, the ability to talk about topics that others can't talk about. This is what Denise does in her prison when she goes visit these women, and the press look at Angela Davis and say it's about them, about us, about all women. It's not only me that did something that's wrong. It's something that embraces us all. And this is the silent society.
Joice, in your book, in different parts of your book, you refer to Saskia Sassin to talk about unstabilizing stable concepts in every area of knowledge. And of course, you focus on the fact that the city is not a neutral space. But I wanted to know from you, based on this understanding, how did literature, art, and the academic thought created by people in the periphery will help render unstable, stable concepts, and to give this whole idea of ownership, being. Oh my God, I'm just moved by the two of you. No. I love Saskia. When I got in touch with her work, this whole idea of her thoughts, and she's a revolutionary academic, and this is something I brought with me for the rest of my life, the whole idea of unstabilizing stable concepts. I guess this is very powerful as a concept because society is built on stable concepts. Racism is a stable concept. Misogyny, phallocentrism, class. These are concepts that are stabilized in society. So we need to move these pegs around and change the concept because it cannot become a place. I always like to consider that when we're talking about different oppressions, we're talking about society. But you do understand, and not always it's easy to assimilate and to locate what you are talking about. To have a Carandiru where more than 200 imprisoned men were killed, it is first you think about a place where you can accommodate in all precariousness men incarcerated, and then you create this micro territory behind chain link fences. So this is a moment in which we have to think and we have to put into practice things in a very strategic manner. One of the strategies is to understand that when we talk about collectiveness, we're talking about social networks, collectivity, everything is interconnected. So it's not just a matter of focusing on one thing and forgetting the others. It's also a sign of coloniality, this fragmented way of thinking. Everything is together. It's not separated in little islands. So we have to find a way to propose and think about collectiveness, because things are not separated in watertight compartments. Everything is together. We're talking about sorority, which is a concept created by Silma Piedade. This is so it's a pain concept. Dororidade. Dor is pain in Portuguese. So this will happen through tools, different tools. We'll create tools to eradicate, or at least to render more fragile the state of things. This is to unstabilize stable concepts. How can we disarticulate racism beyond the cases of our daily lives, like an artist being cursed, the other could be confronted maybe in an airport and then being selected, and I think that art, literature, architecture, politics, we have to create strategies in which everything will be working together, working against these issues. I'm always reminded of this book, which has become a reference. It's by Susan Fallucci, a North American journalist. It's called Backlash. And it talks about the counterattack, backlash. It talks specifically about feminism, but we can bring it to any other area. We have to bring it to everything. There was this battle, this things that impact the society, and the fact that we are here today is a result of that. Each phase of the struggle built a certain path, a certain support for two curators to be able to put into context this new standard of how we present literature to this literary festival, which is definitely the most important one in Brazil. And this we have to pay a price. And we pay a price because of the backlash, and it will come really against us. But we have to be prepared. In arts in general, we have these strategies. I guess artists are showing us how we are able to resist. Sometimes, and I love this report by Angela regarding the story about Angela Davis, to focus on those that are left aside and exile. How many people here would think about doing this? And this is a stable concept that we need to render unstable. It's not because something that is not mediatic and Instagrammable that it will not deserve our respect and our attention. I guess we have to really try to hunt like when we have children with lice, and we have to really look for that lice on the kid's head, because the system is there. The system is prepared to erase, to cancel strategies. Each talent is a strategy. So we have to hunt it down. Who is producing what? Who is writing what? How are we going to translate this into this greater space of a city? How we will articulate this with literature, plus theater, and Sims. I was recently invited by Spessini for this exhibit of Retratos Fantasmas by Kleber Mendonça. This is a white man, and he's talking on this documentary from a standpoint of a white man. He's talking about the dismantling of a city, but everything he said here had a direct connection to my book, Se a Cidade Fosse Nossa, in the free translation, If the City Was Ours. So it is the bringing together of all these things, this three-dimensional point of view that has to be structured. We have to be convinced that it is a strategy to really seek those that are in the margins of society. The graffiti person, boy or girl, the street artist, the artist that no one ever heard of. On the internet today, we thought, who is this? I've never heard of this person. So it's not because you didn't hear about this person that the person is not relevant. Right? Quite the other way around. Just because you never heard of them doesn't mean they're not important. So the most relevant sometimes is the one that will be more in the fringes of society because of this backlash. They know how to identify where power lays. And once they identify the power, we'll do anything to silence this power. So we have to understand this, and what strategy will we use to try to bring the fringes in, bringing everything into a centrality. So Saska Sassi, to unstabilize stable concepts, this is the idea, and it brings to us a certain task. We have homework. How can I render unstable something that is so well founded in society? First is to understand that we see things so naturally, and something that should not be considered naturally. It is a forged naturality. So we have to develop strategies to fight this backlash, and this has to happen at a level that is not identifiable for those who are trying to suppress us, to weaken us. So these people, as Manuela was saying, those that have to go down in the nitty-gritty to try to find these people. These are common people who are just sitting around in all the different spaces. When we try to map a way of disarticulating something, and to weaken them. And we have to find ways to protect ourselves. So this, I do recommend you read Saskia Sassi. It's one of the things that I'm trying to produce in my writing, to bring in authors, not only those that are well known, but especially those who are in the margins and the fringes, because people do not have access to them. And these people have a lot to contribute. So read Saskia, Milton Santos, Lélia Gonzalez, all those great academics, but also those who are not so well known, so that we can truly thicken, so to speak, our strategies. I hope I answered your question. Well, we run out of time. A last question? No, I'm sorry. We don't have time. We really ran out of time. They will be signing their books at the bookshop, and you can, of course, be groupies over there. So I'd like to thank Denise, Manu, and Joice.
Obrigada. Ai, eu não tenho mais saúde para ficar assim que eu choro. Ó, Joice, tá rolando.
Estouramos tudo.
Obrigada.